in time. So welcome to everyone, and thank you for being up perhaps earlier than usual. I don't know, but I'm glad to see you all this morning, even if it is virtually. As you all know, we are live streaming today, so this will be pretty much like our regular virtual meeting. So welcome, and thank you for being here. As I was looking back just a little bit, it was back on the 26th of January when we had our work session then that we spent some time talking about bonds and our CIP update. That was on our agenda back then. And then we had our council retreat in February, and that was also another time when we spent some time on the same subject and trying to work through some figures and a variety of other things. And so from my perspective, today is at least the third special time when we are focused on this particular topic. I don't know about you, but I've always heard that the third time is a charm. So maybe that will be true today. But I want to just in advance thank the staff and others who've been working on this. And I know several council members have had some meetings with staff as well, as have I. So hopefully we'll be prepared to move to a place where we'll soon have to, I think May's our deadline for getting the final information in. So with that, I'm going to formally ask the clerk, if she doesn't mind, just for the record, to call the roll. I know Mr. Vance has stepped aside. He had to make a phone call, but Ms. Gibson, if you'll call the roll, then we'll jump right into our business for the day.
Certainly. Mayor Marshburn?
I'm present.
Mayor Pro Tem Behringer? Here. Councilmember Dellinger?
Here.
Councilmember Matthews?
Here.
And Councilmember Singleton?
Here.
Okay, I expect Mr. Vance to rejoin us just very quickly here, sure enough. So as you all know, we don't have what I would call a formal agenda. The town manager sent out some updated items yesterday, I believe it was, so you all should have that. And the bond summary, some tweaking on that from the previous one we had. So with that, I'm going to recognize the town manager who will provide some instruction and maybe introduction as we get started. So, Mr. Manager, you're up. You're muted at this time.
Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing this morning? Early morning. So this will be a continuation of some of the discussion we had at your council retreat as we begin to kind of flesh out some of the thoughts on the bond, the magnitude, and had some discussion about what the questions and some of the projects, and we still got a lot of work to do on that. But I think this session is going to go a long ways in kind of giving us some ideas on what our bond would look like over the next few years, what the debt service would look like, how we begin to flesh out projects and categories and those type of things. And so we're going to start this morning. We're going to have an introduction by Mike Franks, our former budget manager, to kind of give us a CIP summary and kind of where we are with the CIP totals. And then we also have Ted Cole and Mitch Bergulio. I think I pronounced that right, from Davenport.
You nailed it.
I nailed it. All right. That Duke education, right?
Oh, please.
No comment.
that was for Mitch. But anyway, they're going to kind of lead us into a discussion and the model. And we've gone a long way over the last few years in putting a lot of our debt, our borrowing and our bonds and the things that we've been doing over the last few years, as well as they've incorporated our operations plans, long-term operations into the model also. So they're going to lead us through that and kind of let us know how the bond would fit into that and what's the threshold and magnitude of things we can do with the next bond referendum. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Frank so he can give us some introductory information.
Good morning, Mike.
Yeah, good morning, members of council, Mr. Mayor. Pull up my presentation.
So I'm actually going to give two presentations, one that's on the budget or the bonds, and then a little operating budget piece, but they'll both be pretty brief, but feel free, as always, to interrupt and ask questions. And this is just kind of getting into the details of the referendum and how it impacts the operating budget, and then Davenport will provide additional details.
Mike, could I make one observation? We were all talking about having morning paces and stuff, but if I'm recalling where you're located, you're about 2 hours behind us, so that puts you about 6:30 in the morning. Is that right?
No, I'm still in North Carolina.
Excuse me.
But yeah, I start to work at 10 a.m., so I'm two hours behind in that sense.
Okay.
All right. So everybody, hopefully see my screen. So obviously November 2021 bonds. So just some history. Rodney hit some of this and the mayor hit some of it as well. But the town has been preparing for a November 2021 bond referendum for an extended period of time. It's been going on for maybe over a year in terms of looking at different projects and starting to think about what we could potentially do. At the winter retreat, staff presented a proposal to council. There were a variety of different comments and a good conversation about kind of where we wanted to end up. And we utilized those comments to prepare a revised scenario. And we also have since coordinated with bond counsel. So that's more the technical, the lawyer piece to figure out exactly where the different projects would end up. So we have a CIP with various categories, but in terms of actually sending it out to the voters, it's not necessarily going to fit perfectly into the CIP. So what you'll see today is a little bit of the CIP, but also then how we would actually plan on sending it out to the voters so that they would be able to vote on it. So this is one of the items that you received, it's the CIP bond summary, and it's the high-level summary of all the various projects that the town has. It's just a couple high-level notes. The big piece, future bond proceeds, as everybody can see, hopefully is $71.8 million. So we originally presented something a little bit lower than that, but based on the variety of needs that the town has in parks and recreation, and with us having 2 parcels of land that we could turn into a park and the work we've done there, the variety of transportation needs, the variety of general government needs in terms of the fire station, stormwater becoming a bigger need, we ultimately decided to increase it, and this amount would fit within the 2-cent tax increase that we talked about. So there would be a tax increase required to this amount, but that's where we ultimately ended up. In terms of the specific projects or categories, so parks is one category by itself. It includes 35.5 million of the referendum, with the total of the 71.8. So park development includes 21 million of that. And total funding of 25 million is allocated for the development of Yergin and Meadowbrook. So we have $4 additional million for fee in lieu of parkland. So that's money that developers provide the town in lieu of building parkland for new development. So 25 million total dollars, $21 million in bonds. Park rehabilitation. So this is the park is obviously parks have a variety of different needs in terms of items that have just aged out and could be replaced. So this is more rehabbing parks and getting them back up to condition. Greenways, which I believe is fairly self-explanatory, would be $10 million. One of the things I want to highlight here is that based on conversation with bond counsel, we did increase this amount from the last time. So if we were to build, and somebody can jump in and correct me if I word this incorrectly, but if we were to build a greenway that ultimately had some sidewalk components, so it's going through the woods and then it comes out and it has a sidewalk component along the street, that would fall more under the greenway category than the sidewalk category. So we moved some funding around based on that. So the greenway category give us a little bit more flexibility to do some of the things that the town has considered doing. And land acquisition, we have $2 million. And as the town continues to expand, that money would allow us to buy, additional lands for new parks in areas that are not currently being serviced or do not have a park that are super close to them. So that would be the purpose there. We would also eventually require additional funding to fully develop both parks, but this would allow for us to make a pretty big impact on fully developing potentially one park or having a pretty big impact on both would also have a positive impact on park rehabilitation, would allow us to expand the greenway system, and also would prepare us for the future in terms of buying new land so that we can build new parks in the future. So with that, I'll take any questions on this specific slide and this specific category. And this, again, would be one of the categories that voters would be voting on. So they would see this as a specific question. Any questions on that one?
Questions, council?
All right, hearing none.
Mike, I'll ask one quick one if I might. I don't want to get us into the weeds, and I realize we're sort of looking at this at a high level. The amount that we're indicating will be for parks is, we've talked about this, and I assume that's the case. Are we talking about this amount to be split between the two parks for initial phasing of work? Obviously, it's not enough to do build outs, or I assume there's not a plan to basically focus on one park and delay the other until later. Are you in a position to address that?
I'll defer to Mr. Warlands on that question if he is available.
Yes. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's a good question. And we have not yet brought that information back to council to make a decision on that. So I think the answer is basically to be determined. That, you know, it could get split between the two. It could be used all at one or all at the other. And that's a decision that you guys will be able to make after McAdams gets further along in the next phase of their work and can bring cost estimates and phasing options to you for consideration.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, one thing that's been discussed is that the cost of infrastructure at both parks is going to be extensive and expensive. To get sewer from Hebron Church Road up near Meadowbrook to the building, the historic clubhouse, is going to be very, very expensive. And so what we'll have to weigh is when McAdams brings back this to us is how much money do you put up front in the infrastructure and you can't develop the park, or do you lean toward one park more than the other? So that's the infrastructure at both parks is going to cost a lot of money. So, but we do know that the sewer at Meadowbrook is going to be extremely expensive at this time. And so what do we do? We'll just have to wait and see what they bring back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Singerland. Yeah, I heard that. I don't guess anybody wants to put parameters around very expensive. Maybe it's going to be an estimated figure of any kind. Do we know, or it's too early to know?
I would say it's too early to know at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, unless there are any other questions, I'll move on to transportation. All right, so the next category, I said transportation, but I should, just street and sidewalks. So the total bond funding there would be $27 million. So street and roads, which is basically, you know, more tangible roads. So Jones Sausage, things like that, is $15 million. So this includes funding for Jones Sausage Road, which would be one of our signature projects. And the additional funding, we have a variety of projects identified as potential options, but at this point, I think we would likely just use this funding, the excess funding, funding that we had available to maximize transportation funding opportunities. So as a reminder to council, Campo Lab provides various opportunities where you're able to match or provide a contribution and they match funding. So it would allow us to make some strategic decisions. And there are a variety of roads in the pipeline that we're looking at. But I think Jones Sausage is really the one that has been formally identified as something we definitely have to do. The others are somewhat determined based on development growth and other factors. We then have transit, and that is to buy some infrastructure for the circulator loop at this point. So transit is continuing to happen in terms of variety of different systems, and this would allow the town to participate in a circular loop for the overall system. We have $8.25 million for sidewalks. So we are continuing, I believe, to work on a sidewalk master plan, and there are a variety of different projects that have already probably been identified that we could start to get going on fairly quickly. But with this level of funding, we would probably need to do a little bit more work to figure out exactly what the full scope of the projects were going to be. So that continues to be in the works, but this will allow us to address a variety of sidewalk issues within the town. And then stormwater is also included in streets and sidewalks based on guidance from bond council. And this funding will allow us to address some of the identified projects. So the town did a study and reviewed a certain subset of pipes or a certain subset of stormwater infrastructure. And there are some identified projects, but there's also some need that we know is going to happen as we continue to age as a town to have some additional funding. So this, we believe, will allow us to meet those requirements over the next 5, 6, 7 years as we continue to look for other options to fund stormwater requirements. So those couple critical projects, and then also some funding available for to be determined future projects. We'll pause on transportation and see if there are any specific questions or comments.
Mike, I would add, if I may, 2 points. One on transit. You mentioned the use for infrastructure for the circulator loop, but we also identified that there could potentially be some investments that the town would choose to make in furtherance of the BRT, the bus rapid transit that would be coming from Raleigh. So this amount would be there. It could be used for circulator infrastructure like bus stops, but it may also be available should the town find itself in a position of needing or wanting to invest in any infrastructure to enhance the bus rapid transit program. The other thing about sidewalks too is a little more specific follow-up on when the next steps would be for any sidewalk work at either the March or April work session, depending on how the schedule looks. Staff will be coming back with some mapping of the sidewalks that are remaining in our transportation plan for council to take a look at. And then from there, we'll get council's input on deciding on the next steps needed to do a more in-depth study of some of the sidewalk needs to make sure we're not missing any gaps or connections that should be prioritized.
Mr. Hodges, a quick question. As it relates to transit, will $800,000 get us, I don't know, I could almost call it sort of a down payment of some things we'll need to do in that area? I know Mike mentioned a circulator loop, but could you elaborate just a little bit more? I mean, for the whole area of transit, and that this is going to be an ongoing thing, I'm sure, over a number of years. But what will $800,000 get us?
Well, right now we have it as a placeholder to be able to build the infrastructure to go with the operation of a circulator loop. So the operation of a circulator loop that you've recently approved the route for would really be bigger impact on our operating budget every year, because we would be outsourcing that service to probably Go Raleigh. So this $800,000 has been earmarked to be able to build bus stops along that route, but also could be used if, for example, with bus rapid transit, the transit tax revenues will pay for the transit lanes. But if we needed or wanted to add any general purpose traffic lanes alongside them at a place where a developer were not going to naturally be adding them, then the town would bear the burden of paying for those lanes. And so these dollars are not specifically earmarked for a particular item, but those are two of the primary purposes we would see using these dollars for. But again, it is not the ongoing operation cost of the circulator. That will be something that will have to be programmed into the annual operating budget whenever council decides we want to move forward with it. And there's some potential matching funding through the transit program for operations as well, but a different pot and different bucket of money.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that information. Anybody else have a question on this segment?
Just a quick question about the sidewalk plan and prioritization. I was wondering if Mr. Singleton, he created an extensive list, if that was going to be integrated into what's already existing, if there's any difference in those two scopes.
We have passed that along to staff so they could map that and also look at that in addition to what's in the transportation plan. And then from there, we can look and see what other input council wants to give. But yes, we're gonna visualize both of those for you to be able to see.
Thank you.
And thanks for mentioning that, Damien. I will try to get copies of that. What I did, council members, is about a year ago, rode all around town and looked at sidewalks, missing links, communities that didn't have them, and came up with a list as a starting for a talking point. So we talked about this last week. Damien, I gave him and staff a copy. I'll get Phil and Kathy and Elmo and the mayor. I'll get y'all copies also.
Good.
Mr. Singleton, we're going to be sending an email with several follow-up items from this meeting today. So if you'd like us just to include that list that we send out, we'll be glad to do that.
Yes, sir. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, unless there are any additional questions, I'll go on to the last category. All right, hearing none. The last category is public safety and services / general government. So this would be $9.3 million in referendum dollars. And again, this category is based on some guidance from bond counsel in terms of the best approach. So one piece here would be the Fire Station 5. So this funding, the $6 million, would allow the town to provide their full match requirement. Wake County EMS has also anticipated this will be a partner providing 30% match, but we believe the $6 million would allow us to fully construct the fire station with the match from Wake County EMS. We also have land acquisition of $3 million. I believe this is primarily for the identification and potential purchase of land for a new public works facility. So council received a presentation several months ago, I believe, that highlighted the full cost of the public works facility and a variety of different options. So this would allow the town to have some funding to kind of make some strategic purchases as time goes on that will allow us to ultimately build and construct a new public works facility, because they have largely maximized their space in their current facility. Whether we expand that one or build an entirely new one, this funding would be available for that and potentially other purposes. And then we also have $300,000 for a police shooting range. And this would allow the police department to at least start the construction of a shooting range. This would allow them to not be reliant on Wake County and other partners to provide critical training that would allow that, it's just important for police officers to be able to practice shooting and allow the town to be able to control that. So with that, I will take any questions on this.
Mike, one additional point on land. Council may have remembered a conversation about having a larger amount for general land acquisition opportunities that may come up. One of the directions we got from bond counsel was that to be able to do that, you would have to have a standalone question on bond referendum for general land. And so given from their advice, we've taken that amount and divided it between the Parks and Recreation question, so that those monies would be specifically for parkland. And then the monies here would be specifically for public works, because whenever you do include land, there has to be a public use identified by the land purchase. Otherwise, it would have to be a standalone land acquisition question, which we did not feel like at this time really made sense to include separately in the bond referendum.
Mike, it perhaps doesn't need clarification, but for the sake of those who are listening, as it relates to that last item, the shooting range, I would hope folks would understand that I know you used the term practice, and that's probably not a bad term, but the range.
Training is a better term.
Yeah, I think so. And training and certification, obviously officers have to undergo either annual or periodic certification that requires that they go to a range and perform there. So just to clarify a little bit. Thank you.
And Mayor, excuse me, I'd like to elaborate on that item a little bit further. So right now, that is a placeholder for what could potentially be a shooting range. I think the early model was to partner with a local jurisdiction. That jurisdictions had a lot of turnover in leadership in the police and the town manager. So we don't know if that's feasible, a feasible partnership. Did I freeze up? Okay. So we may be editing that item or taking it out altogether, but I would say right now we just keep it in the land acquisition and not spell it out directly until we have more information on how that could work. Because if we have to do it on our own, it would be a little different than what that's showing.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good point. I appreciate that. And if a partnership can be worked out, I think that's ideal. But I do understand the need for something they have access to as they need it. So, okay, thank you.
What would that figure be, Rodney?
Well, just talking to the current chief and the model that he has in mind, it would be at least $1 million. So $1 to $2 million. So at that price tag, we're not sure it'd be feasible to build one on our own for that cost, but it's some discussions we'll have in the near future.
Okay.
I just have a question too. It'd be interesting to see a comparison of the ongoing cost of having our own versus a partnership as well. I don't know what right now our expenses are related to using other facilities, so that would be good information just to have to look at ongoing expenses related to both scenarios.
Okay,
I guess the question right now is what is our financial arrangement with the sharing of facilities?
Yeah, I don't have that information in front of me, and I know we probably have some police folks on. I don't know how deep into the weeds we want to get into answering that now, but I don't think the cost is like the major thing. It's more of the availability, but we can get that information for you.
Okay, thank you.
If we built this on our own, and would something to think about, is this something of the town where we're paying either county or whomever to use their facilities at this point, whatever that amount is this something that we could open up to other municipalities and let them cost share by paying, I say user fees or what have you, that would help us recoup this? Because not everybody has a shooting range, and if we got one, I know the county sometimes can be a little tough to get in from past experience, but if we had our own, could we open it up to other municipalities to pay us on a per use basis? Would that be enough to recover? So if you factor that in on what we're talking about, that would be good.
Okay.
And then, if I may add, this has been a topic of consideration, discussion for at least as long as I've been on the council, probably for even longer than that. This is not new, and the need's not going away.
And
I was going to touch on that too, Kathy. It's 2021, and we've been talking about this since the 90s.
Yeah.
But this is not. But it's hard in an urban area now to get land that's deemed safe to have a shooting range, practice and training. They're not just a dime a dozen. We're not out in eastern North Carolina where you can go get some farmland and take care of it. This is not that easy. So, and talking about teaming and partnering, we've been talking about that for 20 years, and it never seems to work out.
It's just time to deal with it and move on.
Well, that's easier than it sounds.
True.
And we are talking about an outdoor range too, so everybody's on the same page. And we do have Captain Smith and Captain Clayton on if they just want to take a couple of seconds to elaborate on anything, just so we're giving them the council accurate information. So if you need to clear up anything I said. Okay, so otherwise we'll get back with you on that item as we flesh it out more.
Right. One last comment.
We're here. Sorry, we were a little technologically slow, but we are here. So, both Captain Smith and I.
We're here to entertain any questions that you guys may have.
I guess the question I think I asked Rodney was, how much are we paying either the county or whomever we're training with right now on a per use basis? How much is that costing us roughly a year? Do you know?
I'd have to look to give you the specific numbers, but what I can tell you is that we pay per use, per lane, per use, per day. I can get back with you with the exact numbers. You asked a question about generating revenue. If we were to have our own facility, if we could lease it out or allow other agencies to use that. The practice has been over the years that when we have used other agencies' ranges, they don't typically charge us for that. We do, however, pay the county to use the county's range because it is not owned by a specific municipality.
And if I may, just to echo on Captain Smith with the cost associated with the rental of the range, like Mr. Manager said, that's not as big of a cost as the inconvenience of having to try to schedule range time and trying to find a range when we're trying to qualify new hires, when we're trying to get all of our annual in-service done, and when we're trying to qualify our employees. So it is more of a need for us to be able to have a facility so that we're able to use it and schedule and train more than what we can do right now.
And as the county continues to grow, the demand for access to those ranges becomes increasingly more difficult for us.
I have a question. Are there any municipalities we've specifically looked at with partnering? It seems like, given the geography, and that Fuquay would be a natural partner, given the geography and land opportunities that are sort of northeast of them and south of us. It seemed to be a natural partner for going in together. I mean, I know we talked about it on the fire station, and that kind of looks like that might not pan out. But has there been conversations with Fuquay at all about joining together to do something like this?
I'm not familiar with any specific conversations that have been had with Fuquay. I know that we were having some conversations years ago with another agency that's in an adjoining county. But like the manager said, they've had some turnover, and that opportunity has seemed to have been put on hold for now.
And I will say, in terms of land, I believe Mr. Roylance and Mr. Dickerson had authorized us to look at a piece of property that was adjacent to I-40, and our lieutenant has looked at that. It is landlocked, so there would be some cost to access it, but it is, I believe, a piece of property that ConAgra donated that is on the other side of I-40.
It's 4857 Jones Sausage Road.
Yeah, I don't think that's not available anymore.
Oh, okay.
I think that recently went off the market, so. Yes,
Probably.
probably.
Not the location.
One thing for sure, it's going to be costly. So if we procrastinate too long, finding that land's going to be hard.
Yeah, I will get with the police department. Chief Benz is on vacation, so he was not able to join us right now, and we'll follow up on some of these questions and give you a report on where we are with that pretty soon.
And if you could, I mean, maybe talk to the town manager in Fuquay. They're growing rapidly like we are, so I'm sure they have the same restrictions and limitations and face the same similar issues as our police department. So, just an idea.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you. We could probably move on beyond that. I was the one, I guess, opened the door there, but yeah, I appreciate the follow-up information, and thanks for the representatives from the police department who were able to share with us there.
All right. Just getting back to this presentation, that's the last bond category. The next slide is something that we just want to share with council and provide some high-level information on. Based on some recent activities at the federal level. So as everybody, or I assume everybody's aware, yesterday the House of Representatives passed the federal stimulus, and President Biden, I believe, is anticipated to sign that on Friday. And this stimulus is projected to provide the town with several $1 million. So current guidance from Wake County suggests that the town will be able to utilize the funds to cover costs incurred by December 31, 2024. So it's still, there's still some limitations there, but it would be a fairly extended period of time. And then I've just listed the various categories that the current guidance says we'd be able to spend funding on. What I would say is that this has to still go to the Treasury Department, that there will be some additional guidance coming out. This is extremely preliminary, but we want to at least let council know, because there is the possibility that this funding could be utilized for infrastructure purposes, depending on exactly what the final guidance is. So as you can see, the first one is respond to COVID emergency and address its negative economic impacts, to aid to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and industries, provide premium pay, which is something the town has done and has, I believe, stopped doing, so that would not be as likely. Provide government services affected by revenue reduction from the pandemic, relief. So basically make up for lost revenue. And then the last category is make up for investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And then the last one is just no deposits into the pension funds, but that will not impact the town. So this is more of just a FYI. And I understand, obviously, we have to make decisions, as the mayor said, prior to May. And I'd like to think we'd have guidance by May, but there is obviously no guarantee exactly when we'll have a full picture. So these are some of the things that are being talked about at the federal level that could have an impact on the town and could provide us some one-time funding that would allow us to meet projects in the CIP. Obviously, one-time funding, we don't want to commit ourselves to long-term obligations. So a CIP is a fairly natural place to put some of those items in. But it really does depend on the regulations, the final guidance, and this is, extremely preliminary, but wanted to give the council a heads up. So with that, we'll take any questions on that.
Okay, questions from council. Thank you for reminding us of that. Obviously, it's much in the national news, and it will filter down eventually to this level. And I know it seems like in the previous bill, or maybe the previous two, the counties seemed to be the focus, and then the counties would disperse money from there, and we did receive some allocation. I know there were some places where apparently municipalities complained that they didn't feel they were getting as much from the county as they should, but I'm not suggesting that occurred here. But at any rate, that is another source that ideally we could certainly use in a very constructive way. Anybody else have a question about that? Okay, hearing none.
All right, that was my last slide on the CIP presentation. So just a couple of highlights, and we already took questions throughout, but $71.8 million Davenport will provide a presentation highlighting the financial impact there and what's required in terms of getting us to our capacity level. It funds a variety of different requirements within the town and meet a variety of different needs, and overall I think be a pretty positive package. So unless there are any other questions, I will transition over to my impact on the operating budget. And this is just a high-level overview of where we're at on the current budget. And then also we're always going to try to tie together the CIP and the operating budget, because obviously as we build new items, for example, the fire station, new park, it's going to have an impact on the operating budget. So we want to make sure council is aware of the long-term implications of the decisions that are being made.
I have one quick question, and before we get into this part. So it doesn't look like the public works facility has been plugged in, the construction of the actual facility has been plugged into the CIP in any way through the next 10 years. Is that going to happen so that cost starts to appear in those long-term expenses? Either on the budget, if it's not in the CIP, it's not in the budget, but I'm talking CIP, do we need to include that going forward?
I would say we could certainly program it into the long-term cost, I think, and I will let Matt comment, but I think there were just so many variances in terms of the different types of costs we could incur based on the just different decisions we could make. We have not done that yet, but I will now defer to Matt.
Yeah, no, I think Mike covered it relatively well. I just wasn't sure if he would be looking for help answering it, but I think until we finish the study that we're doing now, we didn't feel like we had a realistic way to put a number in there, and we know that it will be a significant enough expense that it can't be in this bond referendum. So I do think we'll probably plug it in once we have a number that we have more confidence in, but we haven't worried too much about it until the study's done.
I think we need to go ahead and plug even a placeholder number in because it is such a long-term project and projection. And even if there's an asterisk by it every time that says this could be up or down 10, $15 million, because the other thing is this bond is around 70 million, but the total cost for even the projects identified is between 130 and 160 million. So there's a whole other bunch of revenue we're going to have to come up with. And this is another one of those pots that's going to be very, very expensive over the next 10 years. So I wanted to kind of always be on our radar to be thinking about.
Well, I agree with that, Damien. One issue is we don't have any clue what we're going to build or how much it's going to cost. So just plugging numbers in is fine. But I think, as they told you and I last week, this facility to be built out might cost as much as one of our parks we're talking about. And we know they're between $20 and $30 million. So I don't know if we just randomly put $25 million up there until maybe, I think we're supposed to get a report back this month or next month from the consultant and maybe get some more numbers. I don't disagree with putting some number there, but I think we need to make sure we know the ideas of the numbers we're talking first. But it is going to be a significant sum of money. Everyone,
at the very least, we need to have it as a line item, so we don't. It's always present in sort of our thinking.
I agree. We can put to be determined later.
Yes.
I think we're probably not too far away from having at least a first pass number from the study. So I think we could certainly put a placeholder number in, but I think we can replace it with a better number in the very near future.
And just a minor point to add to that, just keep in mind as you're reviewing our CIP document, a couple of years ago, because we wanted to plug numbers in that were not completely vetted, but we didn't want to run the risk of what happened in the past of people taking those numbers as final. We've started using another color in the CIP. So if you're ever reviewing a current or future CIP document, just always be on the lookout for footnotes, of course, but also the numbers in a different color are there very purposefully to try to overcome situations we had in the past where folks may have taken a number we were plugging in as a placeholder as a sort of a final answer. So just as a reminder, you'll see sort of a reddish orange number in your CIP documents that is always that not well fleshed out, and there's a footnote to denote that.
Thank you, John. That's a point well made, sure enough. Welcome back, Mr. Vance, okay?
Thank you, sir.
Did you have any questions, or I don't know if you...
I just stepped in. I do have a few questions, but it may not be in the order. I'll just continue to listen and see if it falls out or not, then I'll ask my questions.
Okay, thanks, sir. Thank you.
All right. So that concludes my portion of the CIP. The next portion is the operating budget. And I'm going to go through here with less pauses, so feel free to just jump in if you have any specific questions. There's just less natural pause points. So I'm going to highlight mostly the FY22 budget, but also want to give you the full picture of the the 5-year forecast, because that's something we've been utilizing and I think it's been beneficial. So just recent history is something we're going to touch on, review the 22 budget, and then also the forecast. So in terms of recent history, a few years ago we started to utilize the multi-year budget model, and that helped us stabilize the budget. We identified what we considered to be somewhat of a structural deficit based on a variety of factors, and that's something that we've addressed over the last few years, and I think we're in a much better position, or I know that we're in a much better position in the upcoming budgets based on the actions that council has taken. So we appreciate your willingness to be proactive in this approach, again, to stabilize the budget and allow us to meet some of the more important requirements. FY21, just as a reminder, it feels way more than a year ago, but it was about this time a year ago that we were talking about the impact of COVID-19, how it was going to impact our operations, how it was going to impact sales tax, just everything, to be honest, in terms of the overall society and how it would impact the town. So based on that, we decided to go with a more, I guess I would say, conservative approach of predicting the worst case scenario. So we included in the FY21 budget a variety of expenditure reductions. We were very aggressive with assuming that sales tax would be far below what we had recently what our projections would have been. Very large decrease there. We had a very large decrease in Parks and Recreation. We also included a tax rate of 49.71 cents, which was $100 of assessed value, which was an increase of 3.5 cents above the revenue neutral rate of 46.21 cents. So as a reminder, that was a revaluation year. So the county went out and looked at all the various property within the county and said, here's how much it would be if it was on fair market. They do that every 4 years. Then they say, here's how much value, here's the new value of the property, and here's the tax rate that you would have to apply to make sure that the town doesn't basically generate any additional revenue. So households would still be up and down based on which house appreciated more or less, but the goal is to provide a rate that would make sure the town doesn't generate any additional revenue. So we went 3.5 cents above that. And we also were able to, with that, include funding for a variety of different initiatives. So various public safety initiatives and fire and police. We were able to implement the pay equity study, add some funding for perform the public facilities repair and maintenance process as we're starting to build new assets, also making sure we're taking care of the old assets. And then we have some one-time funding to prepare for the referendum as well. So the current forecast. So we are in FY21 currently projecting a balance of approximately $500,000. So FY21 is the current budget year. So this is just an updated number. At this time, we usually do a third quarter forecast where we look at how our revenue's coming in, how our expenditures looking. At this point, we think we'd have about a $500,000 balance. So that's being in the black at the end of the year as opposed to being in the red in terms of overall fund balance. So good news there. This is based on some one-time COVID funding that the town did receive and several other factors. So Parks and Recreation has been kind of offset both ways with lower expenditures, also lower revenues. We've had some staff departures, but really COVID, the one-time funding, and then just the overall COVID environment has been the biggest impact on the town's operations in FY21. So the current forecast for the baseline for FY22, so no new items, just doing everything as is with what departments have submitted. So departments included there based on operating budget, which staff always reviews and makes changes to. But if we just took exactly what everybody has asked for and we're fairly conservative with revenue estimates, we would have a manageable shortfall of approximately $300,000. What I would point out there is that this number was significantly higher the last few years, so we're in a much better position, and that is extremely manageable with looking at what departments have asked for, maybe taking out a few items, refining some revenue estimates as things continue to evolve. So we are in pretty decent shape for FY22. It is not as good as we were thinking it was going to be last year. We thought we were going to be in a slightly better position when we did the multi-forecast last year, and that is based on several factors. We had some additional costs with the pay equity analysis, so the original estimate ended up being a bit higher than we had originally forecasted. So those are recurring dollars. They're people's salaries, so that continues to have an impact that ripples into multi-year. We added a new IT public safety position, so that was a critical need and something that was well deserved, but also a position that was added out of cycle, so that impacted our projection a little bit. We had significantly lower interest income revenue, so there was a question about this, I believe, from Mr. Dellinger not that long ago, and this is the money we generate from investments. So the town obviously has funding that's sitting on the side, basically for simplistic terms in a bank account, so the money we are generating with that, our bank account, is less than it has been in the past. And this is a big one because the interest income is not impacted by the revenue savings plan. So growth that is associated there is not incorporated into that formula. So if we get $500,000 from interest income, it's just going to the operating budget. So going from $400,000 or $500,000 down to $150,000 is a pretty significant impact. That's something that staff did not fully anticipate. And then there were some lower real estate estimates. A lot of this is based, we believe, on COVID-19. So Wake County across the board, this was not Garner specific, but assumed a 8% decrease in personal property due to COVID. And that's just the reality of being conservative and not knowing exactly how much personal property costs. If you own a restaurant and you're about to go out of business, you might be okay in a few months and your property might be as it was, or it might be significantly less. That's a simplistic example, but hopefully one that kind of hits the point, or a vehicle or anything. And then we included 500 homes in a forecast, and only 389 were provided a certificate of occupancy. So still robust growth, but it was a little bit slower, and the town overall experienced significant growth. But I remember our inspections director, Tony Beasley, saying that, instead of one house sells, instead of building two more, developers started to build one more. So I think that was a little bit lower than we were thinking based on folks just being cautious, but we are still seeing good growth, so it's overall good news. So with that, here is the current 5-year forecast. So I'll highlight a variety of different points. This is a similar format to what we've seen in the past. If I can find my mouse. There it is. All right, so on the top, you have FY budget and FY21 projections. So here is the projection that I referenced, the $500,000 in savings that we'll ultimately have. You see the net balance shortfall of 3.4, but we have a variety of different fund balance items here and other financing sources, so we're not factoring that in as revenue here. So that's where you get the $500,000 figure. Down here, you see the $1.19 million shortfall, but that also includes new personnel and additional public facilities repair and maintenance costs. So if you take those costs out, that's where you get the and in FY 24, 25, 26, again, still shortfalls, but manageable, and it assumes, as we did in the past, continued growth with new personnel. So we've assumed 6 positions per year. In each year, FY 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. We've also assumed that perform ramps up to the amount that we believe is currently required to maintain our long-term assets. We also have the new fire station. So in FY 24, that's on how much it's going to cost to basically operate that station for staff, and then a new park facility in FY 25. So again, all of these projections are fairly high level. They are built on a variety of different assumptions that could change for the positive or the negative, but I think overall the staff, we feel pretty positive. We've weathered a, hopefully a once in a lifetime global pandemic fairly well, and continue to grow at a pretty robust level, and feel like we're in a pretty decent position in the long term to be able to manage growth. We're going to have to make some tough decisions as time goes on, but still be able to meet the town's overall requirements based on our current projections. And the projections, I would just note, are consistent with what we had in the past. I can provide some more detail on that, but we try to be as conservative as possible with growth. The real estate ad valorem is based on what we think is actually going to happen. So working with Ed Triesenberg, Tony Beasley, and then Joe Stallings on housing growth, and then also economic development. Over the revenue categories are based on prior year trends. We're assuming growth in personnel services based on increasing trends, assuming growth in pensions based on the state's forecast. So we think we're being fairly conservative here, and this is where we ultimately end up. Some closing notes on the budget, and then I will turn it over to Davenport to talk about the overall referendum and the cost and the affordability. So again, the current forecast is significantly better than prior year forecast. We're just in much better shape overall. We were seeing shortfalls bigger than what we have currently, and that was not factoring in new positions or new items. It was just baseline, so we're in much better shape. As I said, we have a variety of tools to also address them. It's looking at high-level forecasts, and we think we'll be better off. And but I'll also highlight here, and this is just teeing up the Davenport presentation and starting the conversation that we'll have with the referendum, is that we do have a unique opportunity to utilize the revenue savings plan in FY22 to address operating requirements. So as we prepare for a bond referendum, the town will have a variety of operating requirements that we believe will be specific to addressing those needs. So we'll need some help. I'll get into it specifically to just manage the workload. And these are lessons learned from the past referendum. And because in FY21, we were incredibly conservative sales tax estimates, we are anticipating the revenue savings plan to increase by $1,000. So the revenue savings plan looks at adopted to adopted revenues. It says, all right, this is what you budgeted in FY21. This is what you're budgeting FY22. And that is then basically anything over the certain growth threshold is factored in, and it's compounding. So it continues to build onto itself. So what staff has considered doing, or at least built a scenario, is taking 350,000 of that funding to address one-time recurring needs, I should say, within the operating budget. So the way that would work is we'd take the $350,000, and long-term, the revenue savings plan would not be impacted. We'd continue to do the same methodology. We continue to utilize the same approach. We would just have taken that funding out from the overall model. And because it compounds on itself, it's still impactful, but it's continued to build over the last several years. And in the future, as you'll see with the Davenport presentation, is anticipated to continue to grow into the future at a pretty robust level, and will allow us to address a variety of needs. So doing this, taking that one-time funding that will allow us to address those requirements, will allow us to fund positions that have been identified by the town. So there are a couple. So the project management requirements would be in the engineering department. So there's 3 project managers included in this. So a higher level, I believe, supervisor, and then a specific project manager for transportation and for parks and recreation projects. So those positions would allow us to continue to just be more active in terms of our management of projects. And I think staff anticipates that we will continue to have transportation and park related projects for a very long time. So that's a structure that I think is going to make sense long term as the town continues to grow and doesn't really show currently signs of stopping. And then on the additional financial budget support, the town has a variety of different opportunities, we believe, within the referendum to report out and be more proactive in terms of how we report out on the bonds. This would be a position that would be able to maintain that, and this obviously referendum will continue to happen for an extended period of time, so that somebody that can coordinate with communications and other departments and make sure that council and citizens are fully aware of the financial, but also just the overall impact of the bond referendum in terms of where projects are at. And then the other piece there would be that a lot of the more, I guess I would call, baseline stuff for the budget has been built out. So we have a model to forecast revenues. We have a 5-year model to project out expenditures that we think is fairly solid. Some of the work that long-term needs to be done is at a slightly higher level. So looking at data, starting to do some grant management, things that require some additional expertise. So a position at a higher level would allow the town to start to address some of the higher level administrative requirements in addition to managing the bonds. So Davenport has 2 scenarios. One, we use this $350,000 and one where we do not. So you'll be able to see some additional figures on that, but we at least wanted to introduce the concepts as part of this presentation. And I already mentioned it would not impact the long-term methodology. So with that, we'll just take any questions, and then we can transition over to Davenport and have them walk you through their model.
Okay, why don't we just do a round robin on questions this time, sort of keep them, I guess, from talking over each other. I'll start with Mr. Matthews if he has any questions to come in.
Not at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Singleton?
No, sir. Thank you for the information provided, Michael.
Okay, Ms. Behringer?
No questions, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Dellinger?
So just a couple. When are the firm reevaluation numbers going to be available, or have they kicked in already?
So they are, in terms of what Wake County assessed, fully available, but they did delay because of COVID. People have the opportunity to appeal their revaluation number, and most of those were delayed. And I don't know exactly when those are going to start, but my understanding is probably not for at least a few more weeks, months. So it might not be for a while until we have a full picture, but we have a pretty good picture, but they're also assuming in my numbers, I didn't mention it, but a pretty large loss in terms of appeals for our real estate numbers.
I guess my other question is, I'm looking at the projected expenses in building inspections, administration, and public works, and they rise relatively modestly over the next 5 years, which doesn't seem to be in proportion to the growth we're going to have. And so that gives me concern, and that we're continuing to grow, yet we seem to be continuing to have deficits, which means this growth isn't paying for itself on, we're assuming too much of the burden, shifting so much of that onto residential taxpayers. What I think would be helpful with these models is to look backwards, maybe 5 years, and see how it's been a high growth period over the past 5 years. And it'd be helpful to see how these departmental expenditures have increased over that period relative to how much actual growth we're having, and sort of get a ratio of what is the sort of support level of town services for this growth, so that we can project forward. Because to look at the administration costs going up from 1.56 to only 1.85 over the next 5 years, and building inspections only going up from 1.3 to 1.6 over the next 5 years, with the amount of growth we're having, I think there's something fundamentally wrong in our model that we keep ending up with projected deficits. So I think we need to do some analysis looking backwards to come up with some better predictive ratios or something, because all this growth seems to be doing is creating more expenditures and more deficits for us. So there's something's wrong in how we're looking at our growth. Those are my comments at this time.
Yeah, a few points there I would make is, I think number one, we have tried to account for at least a few positions separately of departments, so that would be growth that you are not factoring into the overall cost. But I think it is important always for council to remember that the benefit of the revenue savings plan is that we're able to borrow a significant amount of money to address future bond requirements, but it is also taking money out of the operating budget. So the growth that we're having is, the two main categories are real estate and sales tax, and we, after the first 1%, take 30% of that and move it to the revenue savings plan. Like that is always going to have an impact on our ability to maintain the operating budget at where you maybe wouldn't want it to be. So that is a fundamental, not issue, but just reality that is going to impact the operating budget's ability to maintain itself.
I think we just need to keep looking at this. I think if we made an adjustment to the fee in lieu for parks, it's sort of, we left a lot of money on the table by probably not looking at that sooner, to the tune of millions of dollars. And so we need to, again, those are expenses we're going to incur based on growth. We need to look at that and make sure that we're not leaving any money on the table when it comes to our growth on the front end like that. So.
Yep, agreed. We can take a look.
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ellinger. Mr. Vance, I don't believe I gave you a shot.
No questions at this time.
Okay. Mike, I guess we're ready for Davenport.
If they're ready, I am ready.
I think we're ready. Good morning. This is Ted Cole with Davenport. How are you all?
Good morning. Good to see you, Ted.
Good. And Mitch is on as well. He's going to pull up his screen. And hopefully, let's just make sure that gets up and everybody's seeing it properly. Here we are. It should be up now. Anybody not see our presentation cover page? Okay. Well, again, we appreciate being on, and if you have questions along the way, one way or the other, flag us down. We'll stop and answer questions. It's a pretty brief presentation, and I'm going to be just speaking generally on the front end, and then Mitch will pick up on the actual CIP analysis. But I just want to maybe reiterate a couple of things. All of this is being developed very closely with staff, and particularly making sure we're aware of all of the dynamics of the models that Mike just walked through. So we are well coordinated in that regard. We're going to talk mostly about CIP and less so about operating, but those are all certainly integrated. And everything we're doing, I think you can be comfortable at the outset that we're putting together a plan of finance that is consistent with your ratings and even, the opportunity to improve your bond rating. You all are a AA1 from Moody's, which is one notch away from AAA, and you are AAA from S&P. And so we feel very good about what we're about to talk to you about in terms of moving forward with rating agency discussions, bond issuances, if this all comes together. So I just was hoping to maybe allay those fears or concerns that I believe this is a manageable universe of projects. The town has debt capacity, and we use that term specific and different than debt affordability. The capacity is there within your rating profile, within your debt policies. So I think you'll see that. But again, I think this is a very reasonable discussion to be having about this type of a CIP that requires the level of debt we're going to be talking about. We don't have any concerns putting this forward to the local government commission, or we wouldn't have any concerns, nor to the rating agencies. And then you all have done quite a bit to help us quantify the affordability. We're going to be basing this off of the potential for a couple of additional pennies worth of revenue flowing into the model. We already had a very good model that was well defined in terms of how are you budgeting for debt service. It's been in place for a number of years that dates back to the prior referendum. And so the town staff and you all have been very disciplined over the years in sort of following that plan. The revenue savings plan has been introduced along the way and tweaked here or there. So I think we feel good in my wrap up here on both the integrity of your bond ratings and hopefully the opportunity to improve that Moody's rating going forward. And then doing this within the debt capacity that we believe you have, and also in a way that is hopefully affordable as we quantify that we might need an additional 2 pennies worth of revenue to make all of this work. And I guess with that, we'll pause briefly if there's any questions, and then I think Mitch will jump right in, and it's not a very long presentation, so we shouldn't take up too much of your time.
Questions, anyone for Ted? Okay,
right.
Hearing none.
Mitch, you there?
Yep. Hey, good morning. Sorry, I was talking and had it on mute.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I've got the screen up. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Some of the slides will get a little small, and I'll try to blow it up on my screen, but I can't see exactly what y'all are looking at. So if for some reason when I zoom in, you can't see what I'm referencing, just jump in and let me know. But we did want to just, on the front end, revisit the CIP summary that Mike shared with you earlier today and focus in particularly on the bond funding plan. And so based upon the projects that have been identified in the years in which they've been identified on the CIP, we've preliminarily targeted 3 bond issuances in fiscal year 23, 25, and 27. And so the first bond issue would fund the projects highlighted in green, And that would cover fiscal years 22 through 24. And that first bond issue would be assumed to take place approximately 1 year after the potential referendum. The earliest potential referendum you all are considering is November of 2021, assuming those elections can be held. And so following up on that, about a year later, November, December, January of fiscal year 23, so that would be November, December of 2022, January of 2023, we have assumed the first bond issue would occur. And that would be in the amount of about $21.4 million. Following up on that, there would be a second round of a bond issue that would cover the projects highlighted in light brown, fiscal years 25 and 26. This would be the largest of the three bond issues at $32.2 million. And then the final bond issue we're looking at is fiscal year 2027 that would fund the remainder of the bond projects. That would be about $18.2 million. In total, we have the $71.8 million of bond projects associated with the bond referendum. Based upon that bond issuance schedule, we have layered in these proposed bond issues on top of the town's existing debt service. So the graph in the top left-hand corner of the page shows you the town's existing debt service in light green, and then how the town's debt service would evolve over time with the issuance of this $71.8 million. The fiscal 23 issuance is in light green, 25 issuance is in light brown, and the 27 issuance is in the gold color. In terms of assumptions for these bond referendum debt issuances, we've assumed, we've made assumptions consistent with what the local government would expect. That's a local government commission would expect and prefers. That's a 20-year term and a level principal amortization. So that means if you issue $20 million worth of bonds, you're going to pay back $1 million in principal every year for 20 years. In terms of interest rate, we've assumed a 5% interest rate. This is consistent with the last referendum plan and provides some conservatism relative to current market interest rates. But given that we're talking about bond issuances that could occur over the next 6 to 7 years, we do want to build some conservatism into that interest rate assumption. And hopefully we can, like we did through the last bond referendum, achieve lower interest rates and have the ability to do more within the same plan. Overall, based upon those assumptions, the $71.8 million of bond referendum principal would result in total principal and interest of about $109.5 million through final maturity of the bonds. Ted mentioned the debt capacity aspect of this. So this referendum, how issuing these bonds would fit within the town's financial policies. The town has 3 debt financial policies. The first being the 10-year payout ratio. This is a measure of how much of your principal are you paying back over the first 10 years. And the town has a minimum policy, meaning you have to pay back at least 50% of your principal amount within a 10-year period of time. And you all, as you can see, even factoring into this bond referendum, the top left graph shows that you remain above that 50% payout ratio, above your policy level. The second debt policy the town has is debt to assessed value, or debt as a percentage of the overall town's tax base. And you have a policy on this not to exceed 2%. And when we layer in the proposed bond referendum projects and debt issuances, you remain at or below 1.5%. So, well, below that 2% policy. The final debt ratio, debt policy that the town has is debt service to expenditures. Debt service is a percentage of the ongoing governmental operating expenditures. And you all have a policy not to exceed 15%. And based upon our assumptions for the proposed debt issuance, you would be below the 15% in every year except for fiscal year 28. There would be a 1-year period of time that these projections show you would be above that 15%. What I can tell you is that there's a lot of assumptions built into this in terms of future expenditure levels, consistent with the projections that Mike walked through, as well as interest rates and timing of the bond issuances. Any changes in those assumptions over time could impact these calculations, and you may or may not end up being over that 15% mark. From a rating agency, from a credit perspective, and talking with the rating agencies, this year out of compliance doesn't cause us any concerns. We've had that conversation with rating agencies a number of times over the last several years, and what they are more concerned about is knowing that you all are looking at these ratios, projecting out these ratios, and are making decisions to pursue these bond issuances, even if there's perhaps a year or two where you would be out of compliance. And if you acknowledge that and continue to move forward, they have been comfortable with that approach, and in fact ends up being a very good conversation because they know you are doing this planning. And that's really what they want to know, is that you all are informed and are able to make decisions based upon projections. So as Ted said, based upon your financial policies, you have the capacity, in our opinion, to take on this proposed referendum. The other side of the question is the affordability or the cash flows. And you all have a plan that's been in place since the last referendum. You've been very diligent in following that plan and have continued that budget process, and that is providing affordability to take on a portion of this referendum. And then we understand you all are considering an additional 2 pennies dedicated towards debt service and helping to support that referendum, which will go a long way into making this affordable. So I know we've walked through this model in detail in the past. We'll zoom in here a little bit and walk you through this just as a quick refresher. So columns B through H, and hopefully everybody can see the columns as I've zoomed in. Columns B through H are the projected requirements associated with your debt service and bond referendum. And we've broken out your existing debt service into a few different categories. We have your existing sort of general town debt service, general town long-term debt service in column B. We have some vehicle-related debt service in column C. That is a couple vehicle financings that you all have chosen to do to fund vehicle replacement for the fleet. Column D is the existing water capacity debt. So this is debt that was issued to purchase capacity for the water system. And that has some specific revenues that you all have set aside from prior year collections to support that. Column E, the highlighted gold column, is where we've layered in the projected bond referendum debt service. Again, this is based upon a 20-year level principal amortization and a 5% interest rate. And you can see this is the total principal and interest of $109.5 million that I referenced earlier. We then have some placeholders for pay-as-you-go capital and CIP operating impact. Columns I through P represent the revenues that would be utilized to pay for this upcoming debt service. And a lot of this, again, dates back to the original, to the last bond referendum plan, which started in 2013. And column I represents that fixed budget appropriation that you all set in 2013, locking in the general fund budget appropriation that was in place at that time. So that's $759,000 a year. You all have continued to budget that amount available for debt service since 2013 and done a nice job in maintaining those dollars for the debt service budget. Column J represents the tax rate dedicated to debt service that was put in place with the last referendum. That was originally 2.75 cents. And at the last revaluation, the town adjusted that to the revenue neutral rate of 2.28 cents. Column K is the water capacity fees. These are capacity fees that were collected in the past and have been set aside to pay the water capacity debt service that's broken out, we talked about previously, in column D. Column L is the revenue savings plan dollars that are being used to support debt service. This does not represent all of the annual collections of the revenue savings plan. It represents the dollars that are needed in any given year from the revenue savings plan to cover debt service. Column M is a placeholder for any new revenues that may be generated from CIP projects. Column N is general fund revenues that are used to support the vehicle-related debt service. When those vehicle borrowings were put in place, the idea was those would be covered from general fund revenues in the operating budget. And column O is a placeholder for any one-time usage of general fund balance. So all of those revenues that we're using total up in column P as in Paul, and we compare that to the total requirements in column H, and that results in column Q, the annual surplus deficit. And you can see with those existing revenues that have been identified, there's deficits in every year moving forward. In the first 2 years, however, you have some remaining capital reserve balance from the original referendum, and so that remaining capital reserve balance is available to cover those shortfalls in fiscal years 22 and 23. In fiscal years 21 and 22. And then going forward, we have the 2-cent tax dedicated towards debt service that you all are considering. That 2 pennies is going to cover the remaining years, any of the shortfalls that have been identified, such that the adjusted surplus deficit every year is 0. You are covered, you are balanced, you are able to cover this bond, the $109.5 million of planned bond referendum debt service within your existing revenues and the additional 2 pennies that are being considered to be dedicated towards debt service. I mentioned that column L represents only the revenue savings plan dollars that are needed to balance the debt service budget. Under this plan, there are some additional revenue savings plan dollars that would be available. So columns W, X, and Y are tracking the revenue savings plan. Column W is the annual dollars that are generated for the revenue savings plan, the annual revenues that are deposited into the revenue savings plan. And as Mike referenced earlier, this is with the assumed growth, the revenue savings plan is continuing to grow over time. Column X backs out the revenue savings plan that is being utilized over in column L to fund the projected debt service requirements. And then column Y is tracking the fund balance in the revenue savings plan. So based upon our existing debt service, our proposed bond referendum debt service, and the existing revenues that you all have dedicated towards the debt service budget, plus the additional 2 pennies, we do not zero out the revenue savings plan. The minimum balance in that revenue savings plan gets down to about $2.5 million. So within this overall plan, with the additional 2 pennies, there is a little more capacity available in that revenue savings plan. Again, that gets to a minimum balance of about $2.5 million. So as Mike alluded to earlier, one of the options for that excess revenue savings plan could be a one-time use of $350,000 that could make $350,000 available every year going forward to fund the potential operating impact associated with the capital plan, or the $2.5 million could be used to help fund additional projects. So what we've done for you on page 5 is showed you if you were to take the $350,000 out of column W. With the fiscal year 22 budget, if you were to reduce the fiscal year 22 revenue savings plan contribution by $350,000, that would reduce the revenue savings plan every year going forward in the same amount, $350,000. If we reduce that from column W, what we can see is that we would be slightly short in being able to cover all of the bond referendum debt service. We would need to come up with the highlighted red numbers. It's $1.6 million that we would be short in this plan if $350,000 per year was dedicated to operations. Now, what I can tell you is we do try to be conservative in this plan, and so any additional growth in the tax base could help offset that $1.6 million. If we receive a reduced interest rate or a lower interest rate than our assumed 5% on the bond referendum issuances, that could also offset that shortfall. And so for perspective, we did an alternate case where we ran the bond referendum debt service assuming a 4.5% interest rate. And under that approach, you would be able to cover this plan. You would be able to cover the $1.6 million shortfall if the interest rate on the bonds are at 4.5% or lower. So in our opinion, I think what this shows is whether you choose to leave the revenue savings plan intact on page 4, or whether you choose to, in FY22, dedicate that $350,000 towards the operating impact associated with capital. We believe that either of these plans are affordable. And while page 5 does show, for planning purposes, a deficit of $1.6 million, there is the ability over time to not need that additional $1.6 million if the interest rates on the bonds come in lower, or if any number of other revenue projections come in better. So I know that was a lot of information, and I've been talking a lot here, Mr. Mayor, but I'll pause there and happy to talk through any questions or anything else that you all would like us to cover.
Okay, thank you very much, Mitch, and we will go around. Just for my edification, and I should know this, I've heard it, but I've forgotten. What penny on the tax rate generates how much revenue currently?
Bear with me 1 second. I can look that up, or Mike, if you've got that off the top of your head.
It's about $487,000 in FY22.
Okay. 487, so a little less than $500,000. Okay, that's the one question I had for now. So let me turn this over to council members and see what questions they may have. I'll start with Mr. Vance if he has any.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I tell you what, my internet just dropped out, and I dropped out when the gentleman from Davenport mentioned a 4.5%, or was it cent, tax increase to cover the overage of 1.6 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Vance, I think you're referring to page 5, and what we were talking about on this page was if $350,000 of the revenue savings plan is dedicated to operating expenses, there would be a $1.6 million shortfall. Total that you would need to come up with in fiscal years 31 through 33 would be $1.6 million to make this plan work. And that could come from other general fund revenues, general fund balance, or if interest rates on the bonds come in lower than our assumed 5%, that could help offset that shortfall. And so if we receive an average interest rate on all of the bonds of 4.5%, that would eliminate the $1.6 million shortfall.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's when my internet dropped off right there. Thank you. That's all.
Yes, sir.
That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Ms. Berry, do you have any questions?
I do not have any questions. That is a ton of information to digest, but in a way that I can halfway grasp it. So thanks to Mitch and Ted.
Okay. Mr. Singleton.
Yes, Mitch, can you pull up the chart? It shows the annual contribution, again, for revenue savings program and this projected debt. Can you blow it up so I can see it?
Yes, sir. Which do you want, the one where we reduce it by 350,000 or just the base case?
It doesn't matter. Just to show the amount that is contributing to pay debt service.
So column W is the annual amount of the revenue generated, and column X is the amount that's being utilized for debt service.
Okay. So I think it's important for everyone to know that without the revenue savings plan, when you would need, $2 million, $4 million, if you didn't have that in place and taxes were whatever, $455,000 or $480,000 or whatever, we learned at the last referendum, the tax increase last time would have been 10 to 12 cents. So that's, it takes money. It does take something from going to operations, but by the way it was formulated, it does help keep the tax rate down. So that's important to know. The 350, that number, now I know how that number was determined this year by staff. Excuse me, staff, y'all are comfortable with that number being a consistent number, correct? Rodney or Matt or Tom? That number's, y'all are comfortable right now with that number being a consistent number, correct?
Mr. Singleton, I think what you're asking is, another way to put it would be, we're proposing to make a one-time reduction in how much we put in, which would carry forward. So yes, we're proposing it to be only a one-time, which has the same effect year after year.
Okay. And y'all are comfortable with that at this point, obviously.
Is that a yes?
Must be.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was a yes. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was
Okay. All right. Okay. I appreciate you adding the column also where you, Mitch, where you had the red taken to 350 out, so it clearly defines the issue, and also the 3 years where the $1.6 million shortfall comes in. But if luck is with us, and if this referendum is approved by the voters, hopefully lower interest rates will more than take care of that $1.6 million.
Okay.
So thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, very good. Mr. Matthews.
Great presentation, Mitch. I appreciate it. And Gray brought up a very good point there for those people that might be watching us online. Try to get a handle on this because there's a lot of numbers we've just talked about. And this looks good. Appreciate everything being put together like this. So hopefully those that are watching will see how we're going to pay for this and how good planning has allowed us to do this. Like the past, we can put it all out on the table and do it right the first time. So thank you very much. And I think we're on board here.
Okay, Mr. Dellinger.
Yeah, just for the clarification, so, and also so everyone understands in a question, this wouldn't change in any way how the revenue savings plan has operated and will continue to operate. And that part is true, correct?
Yeah, this is Mitch, and John or Matt, y'all feel free to jump in, but that's correct. The way we've modeled it is this is a one-time reduction to the revenue savings plan in fiscal year 22. So the amount that's set aside for fiscal year 22 carries forward to all future years. That's going to be reduced by $350,000. But next year's calculation, fiscal year 23 and beyond, will go back to the regular calculation of the revenue savings plan.
I guess my other more technical question is how will this one-time exception be presented and then approved by council for this year?
John or Matt or Mike, if y'all want to answer how that would be presented.
Yeah, we have in the recommended budget, and then I believe in the adopted budget, and the actual calculation from the revenue savings plan, and we also talk about it in the budget summary. So we would highlight it in both those areas that we were doing this. Show the one-time adjustment. I cannot speak exactly to how. I've not thought through how exactly we would show that specifically on that spreadsheet, but it would be incorporated into the operating budget for this year. It would be approved before the referendum occurs, and it would also show, we would make clear that the positions that we were funding for the bond referendum, in preparation for the bond referendum, were being covered with that funding, and it'd be very clear to council in the recommended budget that was the approach, and then that is at least how I have thought about presenting it. But I will allow others to jump in if they have thought about it in a different manner.
It may be something we need to run by the town attorney, because it is an exception to the policy that's in place, and I just want to make sure that it's documented properly, that we're in agreement that we're going against our own policy for this one time, for these circumstances related to COVID and all this other stuff that created it. So it might be worth doing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dellinger. Did you have anything else?
No, that's all.
Mitch, I want to ask you to repeat much of what you said. Sometimes I need reminders. Up front, either you or Ted said, let's see, I think the towns, depends on which rating service, but right now we have a solid AA rating, and I believe, did you mention that, I don't know if being on the verge of a AAA with one rating service is where we are. Is that correct?
That's right. You're very close with Moody's. You're not quite at AAA, but you have gotten there with S&P.
Okay, I was thinking that's what you said. And obviously our our credit rating has a lot to do with the rate we get on our bonds, right?
That's correct. Yes, that will, where you are, you know, as Mitch said, we've been pretty conservative in our interest rate assumptions, and as rates move up and down, you're pretty well positioned to get, you know, nearly the best rates you could. Getting to that AAA from Moody's will help incrementally, but it's you're pretty well there, given the AA1 AAA.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I wanted to mention it just to remind council, obviously, this town's had a good track record of carrying a good credit rating. And I think it's obviously important, and I'm confident everybody on council now is well aware of the importance of maintaining that. And so obviously with the model that we've talked about here, we should be able to do that. This town's had good leadership in terms of its fiscal responsibility. And that's an important element for us to carry forward. No question about that. All right, I believe we've been around robin to everybody. Anything else for Mitch or Ted at this point? Mr. Manager or Assistant Managers, anything further?
I have a question. The information that Mitch presented us, will staff make that available to us and send that out so we can can have that available, so I don't have to. I cut my camera off because I had to place my face up on the screen so I could read it with my old eyes. But yes, if we could get that information to us, because it's extremely helpful.
Yeah, we plan to send you some follow-up information after this session.
Very good. And the information was good. I appreciate Mitch and Ted for their work.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. All right. Michael or Rodney, who's next?
You see, I think we also wanted to maybe talk about the timeline a little bit, like where we go from here after we finish all of the funding and debt discussion, just so you have some idea of how that might go. And I can talk to you a little bit about some of the talk around election scheduling.
Also need, if we can, you know, we're talking about a 3-cent tax increase, and excuse me, when Damien and I met last week, we asked about the plan staff had for the additional money for funding on an annual basis, the positions to manage the bond project. So I wish y'all would go over that with everyone and tell us what y'all told us last week, because that was good information.
Okay. John, you want to cover that, since a lot of that hinges around development services and having staff in place to manage a lot of these projects?
Yes, sir, I can, and I'll see if Mike is available just to pull up. He had one slide that had some of that noted on it, so I don't know if Mike is available to be able to pull that slide back up.
Yeah, but I'm pulling it up now.
Thank you. Some of the positions primary would be adding project management team that would be housed within our engineering staff, but they would be responsible for managing all of our capital projects, the things that are funded by the bonds and any other capital projects that would come up. And this would be a 3-person division that would be created within the engineering staff to be able to manage those projects. One would be a division lead, and then one each to be focused on street and sidewalk type project or transportation, and then one to be focused on park development. And as Mike said previously, we don't create positions lightly, but we do believe that for the development of these large park projects and other park needs, that there's a realistic need for having someone focused just on park project management for probably 10 years or more through this bond referendum. So those would be the positions that would be included from project management standpoint. And we're also looking at adding a position that would be focused on managing the financial requirements of the bond, and someone who is working closely with the project managers to be able to ensure that the bond dollars are allocated properly and all the capital project budgets are kept in good working order.
Okay.
Anything else there, Grace?
Yes, John, could you also touch on, because we'd be adding at least 3 staff members, the question came up about having adequate space for them at this time. Could you mention how you addressed that with Damien and I last week, and how there might be some changes, and also a use of the recently acquired property, which might benefit us also?
Yes, so we are not sure where we would house all of the folks that would be needed. We're thinking through some of those plans now, and we'll likely be coming back with a proposal for some space analysis. One of the options that we do have, though, is the recently acquired building at 120 Avisboro, which is contiguous to the town hall campus. That was originally acquired in part to be able to use it for permanent record storage, and we can make some room by moving some of the record storage that's held in this building to there, because we've got records that need to be closer to us than the current Pearl Street facility, but those records could move there and free up some space in the town hall building. We also want to do an analysis of that space to see, does it make sense for any folks that are field-based for the most part of their jobs to have touchdown space there, or possibly even just creating a project management office out of that space. So we don't know which makes the most logistical sense yet, but we'll be studying how to make use of that building that we've recently acquired, and again, is contiguous to this campus.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just have one comment in the conversation we had last week, that the amount of the bonds and the projects is almost double the town's budget. And so putting this staff in place to manage and shepherd those funds and oversee them is a pretty wise investment of town resources.
Amen.
Thank you. Yes. This is a minor point, but John, in walking through the building I'm in now, there is a little bit of extra space here somewhere, isn't there?
Yes, sir. There's a little bit of space on both the first floor and much less on the first floor, a little bit of additional space on the second floor. And I think the trick is being able to get the folks that are going to work together every day in reasonable proximity to one another to be able to work better together on collaborative initiatives like project management will be, and where's the best place to house them so that we can maximize use. But yes, sir, we do have some space. I will say that we thought we had planned for in expansion when we designed this building, and with growth and other needs, we're filling those spaces possibly a little more rapidly than we thought when we designed this building a number of years ago. But there are still a few places that we can make use of for staff.
Gotcha. Thank you. Guess we could refer to them as nooks and crannies, maybe. I'm not sure, but at any rate.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Yeah. Going back to John in reference to the impetus for going out and looking at placing project managers a part of the staff. Is that a result of what transpired with the last bond referendum and the major projects we had?
Yes.
That developed that need for the project management team?
Yes, sir. It was. I think current and previous staff did a really good job managing within their other workloads, but I think that staff and council have recognized over the years that we could have benefited from having staff that was dedicated just to these projects. Right now, a lot of our staff is dividing their time between the rapid growth we're having and managing it, especially people like construction inspectors. They're having to inspect private development projects, which we want to have happen, but sometimes we're having to do that and juggle the inability to be on site for our public projects that we're doing. And so having that dedicated team to manage the capital projects lets our other staff do the jobs they were originally brought on to do. We did have some mention with council last year about adding a position in engineering that would allow our assistant town engineer to focus some more on project management. And she will be involved with working with project management, but we also want to be able to utilize her skills and resource time to help us move forward with the stormwater utility that has also been discussed. So that is another reason that we're looking at adding this division of project management team so that we can not only manage these capital projects, but get started on the stormwater utility initiative.
And can they also help us with maintaining the schedule that'll be established for these capital projects?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And also the budget as well, to make sure you are staying hopefully within budget?
Yes, sir. And that's the that'll be a joint function of, and especially assigned to the administrative role that we envision adding, that would oversee the financial part and work in conjunction with the project managers to make sure that that is all lockstep.
Okay, now based upon the history, this last question, Mr. Mayor, based upon the history of the last capital projects, did we see any cost creep that could have possibly been prevented if we had a project manager?
I think there was probably some that could have been prevented. I think the bigger thing was not having, it wasn't necessarily creep, it was actually going into the bonds without being able to have the luxury of time to have really thorough cost estimates. We were basing our estimates on pre-design versus on coming out with a number at 30% design or somewhere much further along in the process like you would typically like to have. So in a way, to answer your question, yes, because the project managers will start immediately in working with designers and consultants to do the cost estimates. So before we lock in the amount that we know we're going to take from each of these bond categories and share that with the public, we've got a much more vetted cost estimate than we had the luxury of having last time.
Gotcha. Okay. Have more questions, but I'll hold them. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Well, we probably got some additional time, but yeah, I'll see if any other council member has a follow-on question. Greg?
No, I appreciate Mr. Vance asking the questions he asked from his professional background. It sounds like someone else who used to be on the council.
Yeah.
And I say it in a complimentary way. That's
true.
Yes, sir.
That's true.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Matthews,
Mr. Mayor?
anything else?
Yeah. I like the, John, you made mention of the new facility building we have purchased adjoining our campus, and having everybody consolidated on this new team in one location, which will minimize having any disruption at town hall for the day-to-day activities, and plus everybody will be there and can coordinate their efforts. I think that is a great idea, and so one that would be well worth pursuing is having them consolidated at one location. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, anybody else? Who have I missed? Ms. Behringer, do you have anything?
I'm just excited about the positions being added to help manage these projects. Many years ago, my husband did some work for Resolute Builders, who was the developer for the town hall project. And when they came aboard on town hall, they brought their own project manager. And as we saw, they were only 2 weeks overdue on finishing their project as compared to the other projects we had going on at the same time. And that had to do with project management. And so I'm glad we're heading in that direction. It's long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Manager, where are we? Need you to unmute, sir. Unmute.
Yeah, we can talk about the schedule a little bit. Of course.
We do also need to take a short break pretty soon.
Do you want to take a break before I get into the scheduling part?
No, you can go ahead and talk. Let's just not leave it out.
Okay. All right. So we got to go to bond council, I think by May, and have everything together. We need our questions formulated, and they'll help us with that. And I think we're pretty much set about where we want to be. Might be some tweaking here and there. The other thing that's come about over the last few weeks is a discussion around when elections will be. The census data is late. That doesn't really affect us directly as far as elections, but for local governments that have districts, there's a move to push their elections out 6 months or even greater away from the November 2021. And so I've been in discussion with some other local governments, some towns in Wake County about how that would affect our proposed elections in 2021. And some of them have bond referendums just like us. Some of them are engaged in early voting, just like we typically do. So we've been talking about whether we want to kind of advocate to keep our election in November. And staff has kind of thought about this, and it would not be the end of the world if we had to move to May. But now we're hearing that it could be even later than May. And knowing that we have municipal elected officials that are up, that would change the course of our election, that we typically rotate folks out, in or out on our election. So anyway.
Excuse me, when do you think you'll have some definite times or information on that?
Well, the information I'm hearing now is that there is not a move to move those of us that do not vote by district. So we hope that doesn't change. I've been talking to Mr. Bridges, and he's keeping an eye on that for me. And like I said, a group of managers, we're going to also kind of keep an eye on it and advocate as a group to keep our elections in November if we can, just so we can have some, we can just have some parameters around our schedule and kind of dictate our schedule a little bit better, the way we've been planning it the last few years. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out, that, that's been kind of brewing out in the legislature and with the Board of Elections. The one thing that we really had to consider is costs are divided up by all of the local governments that have elections in the county. So if you kick out Raleigh and Cary, who have districts, that dividing the cost among us that are left would make it go up. However, what we're figuring out is those costs, additional costs, can be offset by us having our early voting open like we typically do. We were the last election, our early voting days were dictated by more by Raleigh and Cary's schedule, because a new law was passed that all early voting sites in Wake County have to be open the same amount of days and the same time and all of that. So being we don't have runoffs and those type of things, we could probably help get our costs down by going back to our regular early voting days, which is typically around 5 to 10 days. Just depends. So I'm talking to some managers about what we want to try to propose to our elected officials on that matter also.
Okay, thanks, sure.
Mr. Mayor, one quick question. This initially came down, Rodney, from the State Board of Elections. So they will have the final say. This is not Wake County Board of Elections, it's State Board of Elections, allowing the local towns, I believe over 500 towns and villages and cities, it's like 63 or 65 or whatever have districts. So I think what y'all are trying to do is to get them to realize the impact on the other 400 and however many it is, right?
Correct, that is correct. And so far, like I said, the initial news was that we may have to move, but then what I'm hearing now is there's not a push to move us. So I think we're going to be fine. I just want to kind of let you know what's going on.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. I would just observe, I'm not a prophet, so I'm not going to try to prophesy, but at any rate, I would be quite surprised if they did move it. I think there would be strong sentiment to keep that on schedule, probably even some legal action in behalf of some places and areas. But at any rate, it'll be interesting to see it unfold. And to Kathy's point, I got to believe that, there won't be too much delay on deciding whether or not there's going to be a movement. Obviously, as candidates get ready and have to do their planning, I just got to believe that a decision will be made early on. I'd be surprised if it goes much longer without some certainty being added to that. That's one person's opinion, so we'll see what happens. Do we need to take a break at this point? I'm not quite sure exactly what other items we have, so I don't mind doing that, and we'll come back and how much, I mean, obviously I'm prepared to be here however long. How much more do you anticipate we will be covering, Mr. Manager?
We had it scheduled till 12:30.
Yeah.
But during the break, I will touch base with staff and the consultants just to see if there's any more prevalent things that we need to cover beyond any questions you might have. So I'll touch base to see if there's any other major topics.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
We have almost 25 of 11, so why don't we come back at 10:45, quarter to 11, and resume at that point, and we'll decide how much more time we need. All right. So, declare us in recess now until 10:45. Okay, thank you all. Council's been on a brief recess, and we are back formally in session now, and we will enter into a phase of some brief discussion, and we'll hear from the town manager regarding next steps and talk about how much longer we need for this special session before we adjourn. So, Mr. Manager, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just as a means of recapping and kind of closing out the discussion, just want to make sure that the council is fully comfortable with the categories as well as the amounts. I want to thank Mr. Singleton for spearheading a lot of that discussion. But we do have our categories, and we will work with bond counsel on how we need to refine those, if we can refine them any further. So don't need a vote, but maybe some thumbs up or some affirmation that you're good with the categories that the $71.8 million bond covers.
Yes, Council, I appreciate the good discussion thus far, and yeah, I think I saw some thumbs up there, so we just need to confirm that we're all on the same page here at this point. I sense that. Been good discussion about this for some time, so thumbs up from everybody. Did I see that?
Yeah, I think
yes, sir.
Okay, I think I see a consensus, and just a matter of information to close out that discussion. We will, I think the plan now would be to just put the firing range dollars into the public facilities allocation, and then we will come back with more information on how we might use it and whether we may use it or not. But for now, we just stick with the broad categories and just get more information on that. And then the other thing is just want to recap that all the council is comfortable with the $350,000 one-time adjustment to the revenue savings plan, and then we will work with the town attorney on how we would appropriately acknowledge that.
Okay. Good. All right. Good consensus on that too, Mr. Manager.
Okay. So thank you very much for all your support on this. Staff and we will move forward on next steps, which include working with bond counsel on all the legal pieces. We'll also continue to engage Davenport, especially as we try to get estimates and get reliable estimates. We will continue to evaluate the projects and refine any of the information we got and provide that to you. And then we will begin to talk about how we will engage the public and put this information out and in a meaningful way, and maybe work with other partners to try to get this information out. So anything else, staff, that I may have missed, or anything else y'all need to add to what I just said?
Okay, is that it, Mr. Manager? Just a couple other things I wanted to mention, but go ahead if you have anything further.
Looked like Mr. Roy Lance was maybe going to say something, but I'm not sure. He lit up for a moment there.
Mr. Roy Lance, anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
I have one question, very briefly, just about the bonds, and it's probably a question for Davenport. But I know that there's a large market out there for green bonds and environmentally friendly bonds, and they can have a premium and tax incentives for the investors in those bonds. If you could ask them if anything we're looking at would fall into that category, and two, is that sort of a decision we can make later? So when we're going to actually issue the bonds versus right now putting them on the ballot, if it's something that we could incorporate into each issuance, if it looks like there's something that could, again, reduce sort of the interest rate for the town on the bonds, or give us any sort of advantage with any projects we're already planning on doing. I would, like I said, anticipate we wouldn't have to make those decisions now or before the referendum, but would kind of like to get some idea. It's something we could entertain in the future that might help us a little bit in the cost area.
Okay, thank you,
That's
Mr.
all.
Dellinger. Yes, I know the manager is making notes of that, and yeah, that would be interesting to know if that's a possibility. It must be, sure enough. So, the one thing I wanted to mention to council is, as you know, I think the manager mentioned at our previous meeting that right now we were anticipating a closure of the town hall through the end of March. And I believe the tentative plan is to probably reopen town hall beginning in early April. And so what I need to hear from council on, and we don't have to resolve it now, but maybe by the next meeting, is sort of in conjunction with that, if the council is ready to move back to in-person meetings, or a hybrid thereof. Obviously, I've taken the position in the past that if we're technically meeting in person, but if there is a council member or two that for their own reasons prefer not to meet in person, then we try to accommodate that. But that's an issue I think we need to come back to since we are moving in a direction of opening things up, and even beyond. Of course, it's a separate discussion, but I'll be talking with the manager some. We talk about opening town hall, but also we'll be talking about some of our other public facilities as well that resolve. So, again, wasn't planning for any significant discussion today, but I think at least by our next meeting we can come to some conclusions on that. Would you agree?
Great.
I agree. It looks like the numbers are moving in the right directions, and significant parts of the population are being vaccinated. So I would hope that we would be able to resume meeting in person by April.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, just to be more specific for town hall, I had originally said April 1st, but that's on the Thursday and the day before Good Friday, and town hall is closed on Good Friday. So I would anticipate the best time to reopen town hall would be on the 5th, and we do have a meeting that night. So. Okay, yeah, that scheduling makes sense given the holidays and stuff there, Mr. Manager. So, okay, I think that's all I have for right now anyway. Any other issues that need to come before the council during this special session?
Does this mean when we open facilities, the rec center is going to open in April?
Oh, we'll have to talk about that as far as guidelines. Oh, you mean, look, you mean these
I'm going to play Damon in some basketball.
Hey, let's do it.
I want a definite answer.
We are moving along on some of the larger items that were outstanding. We got to get them to do some of the smaller items, but we can give you a follow-up on that. Hopefully, maybe at the end of the
Well, I'm just asking, how many more smaller items are there? Good Lord have mercy. I believe the town council could have gone there and taken care of some of these issues.
Maybe we should.
Well, of course, I was by there yesterday, and I didn't go by to go in. I didn't have a way to get in, but I could certainly see where they had to remove the bricks and stuff around the windows to get at the problems with the leakage there. And so, when you start doing several of those, it just it's little stuff, but yet it takes some while to do it. And to Rodney's good credit, I know he's been over there on a bunch of occasions, and his mantra has been, and I supported that, that it's a big old nice building, and we don't want to accept it until we're confident that, both mainly small things now are taken care of as they should be anytime you get ready to move into a new building.
Small? How many leaks have we had? We heard 3 to begin with, and it's been a year or a year and a half?
Well, yeah. When I say small, there are many maybe, but they haven't been, a hole in the roof where the rain's pouring in, obviously. So, but anyway.
How extensive were the number of windows that had to have work?
All of the windows facing Main Street. What they realized, the way those were flashed, was allowing water to get in behind the brick, and then that ran down. So it was more of a flashing detail or installation. So they did remove the brick on the inside and the outside, and were able to reflash the corners. And it appears that has worked. We haven't had a significant rain since then, but in some of the water testing they've done on some of the windows, that appears to be have resolved that issue. So.
Thank you. It's good to hear.
And Mr. Dickerson, and for council, the next step is we're working through some logistics between the architect. The next official step that has to happen would be the architect issuing their letter of substantial completion, or their finding of substantial completion, which is a technical step that we got to take next. And so we probably will have some additional information about that step that we can provide to you at the meeting next week.
Okay. Thank you, John, and Rodney, sure enough. So that's all I have. Anybody else have anything before we adjourn?
I would like to inject just a little bit of humor for the benefit of all. Over the weekend, my grandchildren were visiting, and the 9-year-old was adjusting my personal computer. So on Monday, when I had to sign into a Zoom meeting, my background was the grandchildren waking up in the morning. Thankfully, it wasn't a large meeting that I was in, and I got it corrected right away. But keep your eyes open, folks.
You have to be careful letting those grandchildren get their hands on your computer there, Mr. Andrew.
Exactly. He was 9 years old, and he wreaked that kind of habit.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say, I want to thank, excuse me, Rodney and John and Matt. They've met with me and Phil, and also me and Damien. We asked a lot of questions, got a lot of good information, and kept hashing through some of this information that came through today. So I appreciate staff's time and trying to work through and answer some of our questions.
Yes, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Singleton. And by the way, I know, you're struggling a little bit with your voice today, so I appreciate you being here with us and participating. Sure. Mr. Matthews.
I guess I do want to thank Gray for taking the lead on this and getting as many of us involved with it, because when you do that legwork ahead of time, it makes this whole process much easier. I think, and not only is going to be the biggest bond referendum we ever had, but we're going to do so much more than we've ever done in the past. We're going to be, it sounds the way we're putting this thing together, we're going to be well organized, project managers, the whole 9 yards. And I think once it's all said and done, the citizens Garner will have a lot of projects done they can be proud of, and we can utilize them as quickly as possible. And just to appreciate Gray taking the lead on that and crunching those numbers and getting us all involved. So it made this transition, and the staff being a part of that too. So I think it's going to be one of the smoothest ones we've ever had. The public will be informed, and hopefully we can do an on-time vote with it and get this thing rolling. So thanks, Gray, and everybody involved.
Yes, thank you, Gray and Damien both. We appreciate that time you spent.
It's mostly Gray, but yeah, thank you, Gray.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Marvin, you, big deal.
Lessons learned from the past. I think we've learned a lot from the last 2013 referendum, and don't want to make those same mistakes again.
Right.
Gotcha. Good.
I just want one other thing real quick, just to kind of related to the green bond issue and that stuff. You know, we talk a lot about Garner's image and our branding and our progressive appeal. And in thinking about the public works facility and thinking about, we talked about the debt on the vehicles that we have and these types of things. I think we want to, as we look forward, strongly consider over the next several years implementing more electric vehicles into our fleet. There are more and more of these types of products that are sound products. I think 5 years ago wasn't the case. But with that comes also the infrastructure for having a fleet of electric vehicles. So as we look to planning, and you know, I don't know if there's a place in a bond for a small amount for EV chargers, but if we do a new public works facility, just keeping in mind that things are changing and we want to have our eye to what's available in the market and lead where we can, where it makes sense to incorporate these types of things. I did a search the other day for EV chargers in Wake County, and they're all clustered in downtown Raleigh. Well, we got 40 and 540 coming through. There are future opportunities for people to, I'm traveling across the country. Let me dip into Garner because they have an EV station. So these types of things. But we can do some of that leading the way on some of our own vehicles. And it might not happen in the next 1 or 2 years, given whatever turnover we need in our fleet. But I think we need to look to the future to be kind of leading in that kind of way, in a way, if it makes sense for us. Some of those cars have ranges of 230 miles now, and that's more than enough for in-town, you know, police and fire. I mean, not fire, but police and public works vehicles. So just a thought, and again, kind of ties into our larger budget and bond considerations.
Damien, that's something I mentioned a couple of years ago. I had a citizen who asked me why we didn't have any charging stations in town, and this was not long after town hall opened. And when we meet with the park consultants, McAdams, we're going to have charging stations at those parks.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, whatever. There's going to be some at a facility. Chris Johnson, our engineer, is familiar with this with his work with Raleigh, and they have. He told us several at some Raleigh facilities. So it's something that we certainly should consider. I wish we'd have been at town hall, but really wasn't on the cusp of things at the time. So, you know, and you would think of someplace like White Deer Park, which is LEED certified and natural and all this and that and the other, we'd have some down there. But again, it's easier said than done. I did read an article yesterday or the day before online that Duke Energy has been meeting with all these conglomerates about how to do this statewide, both North Carolina and Tennessee statewide in those two states, and programs to put in place to help local municipalities and government have charging stations. When and where that'll happen, I don't know, but I know that they are getting serious and talking about it.
And I think it's one of those things too, if we can lead the way and have some, you know, have one downtown at the rec center, have one in front of town hall, a couple at some parks. It pulls people from other places to come into Garner so they can charge their car. And so it kind of gives a destination, a weird sort of an interim destination for folks to, there's an EV station in downtown Garner. I've never been there before. My car is going to take me to it because it knows it's there. And all of a sudden they're visiting downtown where they might not have otherwise come into town. So it really, over the next 5 years, if we could, and again, I bring it up in concert with the bond conversation, just that there might be places where we're not putting them in new, but we might want to put them in. We could really lead the way in some of this stuff if we think about it.
Mr. Dillinger, Mr. Dillinger, we did add that because we did not have one programmed into the rec center program, we did add it as a consideration for the proposals for the development site downtown. So we went back and added that, as well as some public art, as options for developers to consider that would be a positive addition to their proposal.
Yeah, we also might want to consider it as other developments come before us, encouraging them or supplementing it. You know, again, if you can't make them do it, but say if we'll pay for 75% of it or 50%. I don't know what other municipalities do, but again, those types of things, you get new subdivisions, new apartment complexes in particular. People have these new electric vehicles, and that apartment complex in Garner's got EV chargers. Just something to think about.
Listen, the the Smithfield Chicken and Barbecue in Nashville, North Carolina has 2 EV chargers in their park. I swear to God.
And people stop there because they can charge their car while they eat. Because when they charge, they got to stop for like 30 minutes or more to charge up. So that's smart. That's smart.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and certainly one that we ought to participate in. I'm thinking I've heard at the national level some discussions about transitioning. I think the Postal Service vehicles to electrical vehicles as ideal for some of the early technology there, where maybe the battery power is not so long, but those trucks don't drive long distances, and they would work well for those types of things. And I want to be very careful as mayor not to single out particular people or particular places. All of you, as you drive about town, maybe see some places, but I think I'm correct to say that at least one business over at the corner of Timber and Vandora, Lorraine, the place, doesn't she have a charging station over there?
Tonight.
I believe. Does anybody else notice that? Okay. At any rate, I think there are entrepreneurs and businesses out there who probably are ready to or will be in the not so distant future to move into that. So something we can certainly promote. Well, okay, I sense that we are pretty much concluding our business for now. So I'll be formal and ask for a motion to adjourn this special session if you're ready.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and rather than take a roll call vote, I'll just ask you if you're in favor of doing that. Please vote aye.
Aye.
Okay, and there's no opposition. So again, Council, I want to thank you for your work. I think we all know that there's still some heavy lifting ahead. We've been doing some of the groundwork and those things, but as we get out there and talking with the public and so forth, there's work to be done, and so town staff will continue to work with us as we make our case, and I believe it's a good one, as all of you already mentioned. So thanks for your vote, and I will declare that this special work session of the town council is officially adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.